quote unquote here at one of our events. Just to point that out, did you guys notice what's different today from like every one that we had before? No, I've always wearing the yellow thing. No, but today the majority, I think the majority of the presentations we've seen have been about people combining stuff from our portfolio. Not 5 new projects, but 5 talks about putting things together. And I think that is actually some little turning point. Now maybe we can find adoption. That's let's see. But anyways, all right. I'm going to be talking about. No, I'm combining things as well. And I'm combining, like I'm. This is like heavily work in progress. I have my computer somewhere, and I can show you running a couple of scripts. But maybe tomorrow, that's it's not that exciting. But what I'm doing is what has been hinted at before. I love to see the TSF project from the CodeThink guys, and that touched the spot. And I have started to work on combining what they do there with what we do in the Rust parts, at least of uProtocol. That's what I'm gonna talk about today. And this has been, and you will now witness the most beautiful graphics that you've ever seen, at least like in the last 20 seconds. I'll give you a little quick, very personal view or understanding of how traditional safety approaches operate and think versus where I am coming from, like, in my socialization as a software guy. And this is essentially, do I have a pointer? Yeah. This is essentially like when people 10, 20 years ago first started speaking to me about safety certification, codification of automotive software. The picture that I got is like, these people are looking at a from scratch built, very an isolated, very specific little piece thing entity that's, it's running on silicon, but otherwise it's like living like in the middle of nowhere. There's no environment, there's nothing. And then by looking at that box very closely and creating a bunch of documents and descriptions and tickets and things and processes and et cetera all over the place, you arrive at a point where you mentioned the word blessing, where that little piece, gets a blessing and a certificate and a badge and can then henceforth be put into your brake system in your car. That's the understanding that I got from listening to people talking to me about that. This is the world that, in my mind, that I'm coming from. That, there's a difference there, right? That's the difference between a monotheistic religion and somebody living in the jungle, essentially. And this has been the status quo of my understanding of where these worlds kind of don't overlap for at least a decade until I came across the CodeThink guys and the TSF thing. But for the left-hand side, the little box in isolation running on silicon, we do have all these standards that Paul talked about. We have the isopath thing, which essentially it's just, in my perception, is a way to have a, let's say, somewhat closer look over there at the jungle, but you usually end up in the place where they say, we can't use that because it's, if we want to use that, we have to do all the things that we have been doing over there. That's essentially the short version that I have extracted from trying out isopaths on any open source software. And Paul said all that. I don't really need to go into this anymore. The point is, the software world that we're in, that's the right-hand side. If you want to benefit from all the work that's worldwide going into building systems, Paul mentioned it, that are running everything that's critical in our society, if you want to kind of at least get a link to that, I'm sorry for that, we need to find a way to deal with that jungle. Maybe not all the jungle, but there are certainly a bunch of things in the jungle that are extremely valuable, interesting, beautiful, fit for purpose, etc. And the guys in the jungle, how could they? They didn't write down requirements. So shame on them, right? And it's that clean slate approach, writing things from scratch, because now we can adhere to a process. It just doesn't compute with the jungle, right? Because nobody will recreate the jungle, but just because you have now defined a process. So what we need is essentially a way to bridge that gap, and that is where, again, coming across that, where in my perception, TSF is the first attempt to actually be practical about how to pick certain things from the jungle that you might like and get a feeling for, are they going to be valuable, useful, trustable, relevant to what I'm trying to build? There's another part to this, which will be maybe the object of maybe a talk at the next community day or maybe next year, which is where, don't need to go into this in too much detail, but have a nice piece of something from the jungle. The nature of the jungle is this piece is not a box that's sitting in isolation somewhere. This is building on top of the shoulders of hundreds and thousands of man hours of work, libraries, etc., that are being used by that thing to make it do what it does. It simply does not compute on an economic scale to do all of that kind of certification work for all that dependency mess that you're getting into. And it will not be practical to even try, to be honest, because just the accumulation of changes over time in your dependency tree will kill you. So essentially, another part that will be interesting going forward is to, besides the process things and the requirements things and all the formalities around the code base, actually it's about safety engineering, like functionality. Does it really do what I want? And there needs to be a way to compartmentalize to prevent analysis creep at the end of the day. I don't know whether that can be done or how that can be done yet or how well that will work. Again, looking at economics. But if you can't do that, then again, you're lost. You have to write things from scratch in the desert because anything else will not be economical. And essentially, this is where we are, like what we are trying to do, or what I have started to do in the context of our uProtocol project. So essentially, the question is, can we get maybe we are right now in something like that stage over there. Can we become a beautiful butterfly? And there's tools that have been mentioned today, right? We've got the traditional ISO standards or like safety standards in general. We got approaches from academia / other areas that try to deal with the functional scoping. We got mentioned the Eclipse safety development process. You can read the rest for yourself. We got all of those things here. Oh, I'm sorry, too fast again. As mentioned, the traditional standards for what is on my mind just are irrelevant because this is the jungle. And I have kind of pulled back from the STPA thing right now, the functional analysis scoping thing right now, because right now I'm looking at working on the low-hanging fruit. This is going to be a bit more work going forward. But essentially, there's a bunch of things now left that might be, interesting / able to contribute to getting to, something like this, our butterfly, a score, trustability score, whatever. I was hoping that Paul would have had more time to explain about the TSF approach, but essentially it boils down to a set of, statements or tenets that are posed and that are broken down into, more detailed aspects of each of those areas that you can then go analyze your code, your process, your thing against, create evidence, like, if the provenance thing says that whatever, you only, so let's take it away from the safety part into something like intellectual property. You're only allowed, surprise, to use licenses that you're allowed to use. Well, then you better have evidence for what you're doing that your code base actually adheres to, those demands. And the same goes for all the other aspects that are defined by the TSF framework. And this is very rough, and this is definitely not true in detail, but the tools, the methods, the things that are available now specifically for the Rust pieces of our uProtocol project, they will fit, they will be useful to address one more area that TT at TSF is making demands for, essentially. So that's the idea. Can we use, for example, certain aspects, features of the, in my mind, absolutely awesome tooling in the REST community to, provide evidence for certain aspects? Can we do the requirement thing? I'll get to that in a minute. We do the requirements thing in OSS using Open Fast Trace. Can we use that for our TSF score, and so on and so forth? And essentially, that's what I've started to look into a couple of weeks ago. So the idea is, as mentioned, the good things that happen in our project anyways already. Again, for example, good specifications, rewritten and continually improved specifications, explicit and traced requirements through code to tests, etc. We have a bunch of things that are extremely cool, again, from the Rust tooling ecosystem, that give us, evidence, and that give us reports, and that give us insights into what we're doing that simply have not been available for other ecosystems in the past. We have all of that. We have the TSF to tie it all together, and we happen to be an Eclipse Foundation project, which gives us a bunch of things, regarding bylaws and developer roles and processes and the upcoming safety process, that are there, and that, for example, again, going back to IP policy, that guarantee on that legal level, that we're going to be good there. So again, take those things together, you get to cover, I don't know how much yet, but maybe somewhere between 30 and 60, 70% of what TSF actually wants to see as a starting point. And that's what I've started to do. So what we have for the core Rust components of the uProtocol project, we do have, well, I don't know how they compute to the best in the world, but I think we have quite elaborate and decent release build and test processes that generate info. We have the Eclipse quality badging process that we also generate the outputs for. We have, as mentioned, requirements, specifications, linking all that together. We can use all of that automatically to map things into evidence for the TSF statements and demands, and get to hopefully something, to indicate what Paul said earlier, a credit score for what we're doing. That's the idea. And what this looks like right now is, as mentioned, it's not very exciting at this point, but this will go public, I don't know, in a week or 2 or 3, maybe. I set up a little repository that essentially contains or does 2 things. It contains all of the TSF tenet statements. It will contain let's say, bundles for now, starting this, bundles of prepared evidence and demand statements, for example, linking back to things like the Eclipse process, or things that we cannot generate because we are a Rust project, or things that we, requirements, for example, that we just do. And essentially, it contains logic that can be put into a CI pipeline that could be run on your desktop if you want to prepare a report for review, maybe for assessment at some point in the future. Where essentially what that repo or that functionality we do is it will pull in for all declared release components that you want to be part of the scope. It will pull in any release artifacts that we have declared in those components using the little Quivi. I invented a logo yesterday. And GIMP. We will pull in all of the quality releases that these individual components declare anyways. This will have to grow a bit more elaborate. That's going to happen in the next few weeks. It will essentially pull all of that together, download everything so that it can be archived, for posterity, essentially. And then the plan is, and I started to do this, it will go through all of the evidence things, all of the artifacts that were downloaded, and based on artifact type and probably tags and stuff, it will then generate, wherever possible, links and evidence statements to, kind of combine that, link that to the statements that have been made by the TSF framework, for example. That's the idea. So the idea is to essentially build something that will get us through all the low-hanging fruit to a first version of this by simply, pointing out, linking up everything that we have anyways for the time being. This is not going to be, in the first stage, this is certainly not going to be sufficient to take that uProtocol release and certify it as out of context for anything real, because a huge part that's going to have to come at some point is the the actual safety engineering, where we look at functionality and promises made and how we test and validate them. That's going to hopefully happen as well. But that first stage is going to get all of the other things, the boring stuff, out of the way. And what I hope we can do, and I think it should be quite rewarding, actually, because the TSF guys are joining us with that project. And I'm thinking that, I don't know whether anyone had a look at that repo, but essentially the TSF project repo, one huge part of, the majority part of that is, just the tree of statements, that tree that Paul showed earlier. That's all text files that are then used by that tooling to do your thing. That's a large part of that repo. Obviously, in the TSF project, it's on that top level and a bit of breakdown for that. And again, what I said, I think there's a bunch of statements and evidence that a Rust project can get automatically, especially if it uses a certain, CI, which, for example, we do, and we have a generic project for people to use, right? If you're an Eclipse project, again, here's a template batch of statements that you will get evidence for anyways, because you're an Eclipse project. So what I'm hoping is that we can, in the maybe course of the year, come up with a few of these, let's say, call them templates, or I don't know what good word for them, little template archives of statements. Like if you're a Rust project, okay, pull this one. If you're an Eclipse project, cool, pull this one. If you're maybe that other kind of project, cool, pull this one. Put it into that kind of release engine, whatever we call it, evidence engine, and bang, you'll get at least a starting point here. And again, right now I've got this working, but the depth, let's say, is and actually the depth is there, the breadth is not there. Like this is very thin right now. But watch that space. I think we will, as long as the polls have time for me, we will pursue this to a certain degree. And Holger, for example, I don't know whether you care. Yeah. Because if you care, we can just do that almost like together. It's going to be the same thing for you guys, for example. So in a nutshell, the idea is take what TSF has put out and find a way to get that, the first from I don't know, 80% is too much, but get everybody into a position where they can just use that and get kickstarted, essentially. They can then decide how much time they want to put into, getting better, detailing out, doing all the functional engineering things. That's the big thing, right? That's the big effort that's going to be there. But all the menial things, all the stupid things, maybe we can get those out of the way. That's the idea. All right, by the way, that's the last slide. I'm done. Any questions?
Thank you, Daniel. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in your GitLab action also because it's linked to our maturity badge.
Yeah, it will have to
Any
grow.
question from the audience? No questions, everyone? No. That's...
Well, first a comment. So obviously I'm very pleased that you're exploring it. So the left-hand stuff, in effect, that's just project hygiene. That's about managing the process stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When we've been doing this 61508, the work broadly broke into two halves. One was demonstrating that we were compliant with the Route 3S, which is showing the actual safety argument stuff. But then as soon as we'd achieved the review of that, it was, okay, now we need to start again and look at your process. That part was actually relatively easy because, as you said, we're just collecting a basis for saying, look, this is a mature project.
Yeah.
It's got all of this evidence
exactly.
inherent, right? So. So I'm not
Do you wanna-
surprised.
Yeah, and this is a thing that we can, like, not we will be agreeing, but in general, we can have a debate that for days and weeks and months, and people have done that, you too, with, people coming from the desert side of things. I stand by that, and you said it again, you said it earlier, a well-run, mature open source project, in my experience, is leaps and bounds ahead quality-wise of probably not all, but most of the commercial code bases I've seen. The only question is, can we actually kind of make that visible, right?
So our dictator asked me to do it very quickly. Thanks, first of all, Daniel, for putting that effort into that. I think that is helpful for the entire community. Did you consider, or do you consider also, or I imagine that many people will only trust that trustable approach once they see a certificate in the end. Do you consider asking any authority to look at that, what you're doing, and give that attestation?
Will you pay for it? Not right now.
I don't believe that that is even feasible to do. I guess what has already been certified is the approach, right? Safety assessed, okay. So the overall approach seems to fulfill the requirements for safety relevant systems. However, getting certification for a particular system that actually uses this component is something completely different. So there is no point really in getting a certificate for a uProtocol component
We
based on
definitely
that.
can't do that in isolation. Now, we would be ecstatic, like at least I would, if there happened to be a adopter for uProtocol, somebody putting that into a product.
Yeah.
Once
But-
that happens, I think we would probably move the world to do whatever necessary to enable these guys to do an assessment and a certification.
I think it's
right?
the other way around, Daniel. Having all of that in place gives anybody who considers using the software a chance to actually come to a conclusion whether this is trustable.
It gives a starting point. I don't think we will, on our free time, essentially, do everything that's possible, but we show what could be done.
Exactly. It shows the spirit, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's worth investing in it,
Exactly.
using it, and bringing it or using it in a system that gets certification. And once that happens, I think we have a proof point that this is the right way to go.
And if that is on the table, again, I think we will be happy to put in whatever necessary to get to whatever degree, but probably not just because we're bored right now. We're not that bored.
I would like to invite you all to go for coffee. Tomorrow in the open collaboration, we do have quite some time dedicated to working hands-on on Trustable. So